Thunder rolled across the dark sky above the Drakari Palace, but the real storm was happening inside the massive stone walls. Emperor Vax pressed his clawed hands against the ancient viewing glass and watched smoke pour from the nursery tower. Again, this was the third fire today, and it was barely noon. Your Majesty, wheezed his oldest advisor, Dra, as he limped into the throne room. With singed robes, the Zelthari caretaker has departed. How long did this one last? Vax asked, without turning around. 2 hours and 16 minutes, sire. She lasted longer than most. The Emperor's yellow eyes reflected in the glass. His twin hatchlings, born just 6 months ago, had already driven away 15 different caretakers. These were not ordinary dragon babies. The palace scientists had enhanced them with genetic modifications meant to create the perfect war dragons. Instead, they had created perfect chaos. What happened this time? Dra pulled a small recording device from his scorched pocket. The Zelthari female attempted to feed them their morning meal. The hatchlings apparently disagreed with the menu selection, and well, the recording showed a tall, blue-skinned alien woman entering the reinforced nursery with a tray of carefully prepared dragon food. 2 small shapes moved in the shadows near the back wall. They were no bigger than house cats, but when they opened their mouths, streams of white-hot plasma erupted across the room. The alien woman dropped her tray and ran, screaming as the walls began to melt. She's the 15th one, Fax muttered. What species haven't we tried yet? We've exhausted most of the known child care specialists in this sector. Your Majesty, the crystalline caretaker was literally shattered when the hatchlings discovered they could produce sonic screams. The Vorak nanny was found frozen solid after they learned to breathe ice instead of fire for exactly 17 minutes. The robotic units keep getting melted into scrap metal. Vax turned away from the window. His empire stretched across 12 star systems, commanding fear and respect from hundreds of species. His armies had conquered worlds that other rulers only dreamed of reaching, yet 2 baby dragons, his own offspring, were defeating him completely. There must be someone, he growled. What about the Menuri? They're supposed to be good with difficult children. The last Menuri caretaker had to be hospitalized for mental trauma, sire. Apparently the hatchling's telepathic screams gave her permanent migraines. The massive doors to the throne room burst open. General Quarks, the Emperor's military commander, strode in with his usual confidence, but even he looked worried today. Your Majesty, we have a problem. The other noble families are starting to talk. Some are saying the hatchlings are cursed. Others think they're too dangerous to live in the palace. There are whispers that maybe they should be relocated. Vax's eyes flashed dangerously. No one touches my children. Of course not, sire, but we need a solution. The palace staff is getting nervous. 3 maintenance workers quit yesterday after the babies accidentally melted through the floor of their room and nearly fell into the weapons storage level below. Dra cleared his throat nervously. There might be one option we haven't explored, Your Majesty. What? The recruitment office received applications from some newer species, ones we don't usually consider for palace positions. Vax raised an eyebrow. Such as human, sire. The throne room fell silent. General Quarks made a snorting sound that might have been laughter. Humans, the general said. Those primitive mammals from the outer rim, they barely invented spaceflight 50 years ago. What could they possibly know about caring for enhanced war dragons? Draw shuffled through his papers. Actually, sir, they have some interesting qualifications. Their application mentions something called pediatric nursing and child psychology. They claim experience with what they call difficult children, Vax repeated slowly. Have they ever dealt with children who can melt through solid steel? Unlikely, Your Majesty, but they're willing to try, and honestly, we're running out of options. The next closest species with child care experience is 3 weeks travel away. General Cork shook his head. This is ridiculous. Humans are weak, soft creatures. They have no natural armor, no claws, no enhanced strength. They'll be incinerated the moment they walk into that nursery. Maybe, Vax said thoughtfully, but they'll be cheap to replace. Another explosion echoed from the nursery tower, followed by what sounded like very angry baby dragon roars somewhere in the distance. An alarm started blaring. Send for the human. Vax decided. What's the worst that could happen? Draw made a note on his tablet. Her name is Amy Collins. Your Majesty, she should arrive tomorrow morning. Make sure the medical team is standing by, General Corks muttered, and have the cleaning crew ready to scrape up whatever's left. The Emperor walked back to the window. Down in the courtyard, he could see palace workers running around with fire extinguishers and emergency equipment. His children were in that tower, probably terrified and confused by their own abilities. Every caretaker they'd met had tried to control them, contain them, or simply survive them. None had tried to understand them. Maybe it was time for a different approach. I want continuous monitoring of this human's attempt, full recording, medical scanners, the works. If she somehow manages to last more than an hour, I want to know exactly what she's doing differently. Yes, Your Majesty. As the sun set behind the palace walls, another small fire started in the nursery tower. The Emperor watched the smoke rise and wondered if tomorrow would finally bring a solution, or just another failure to add to his growing list. In the deepest part of the palace, 2 small dragon babies curled up together in the corner of their reinforced room. They didn't understand why every adult who came to see them ran away screaming. They didn't know their fire was too hot, their roars too loud, their claws too sharp. They only knew they were alone, and they were scared. Tomorrow would bring another stranger to their room. But this time it would be different. This time it would be a human. Amy Collins had seen her share of difficult children during her 15 years as a pediatric nurse on the frontier colonies. She dealt with kids who bit, kids who screamed, and kids who threw things, but she'd never dealt with kids who could accidentally melt the walls. When they got upset, the transport ship had dropped her off at the palace dock that morning, and now she stood outside the most famous nursery in the galaxy. The door was made of some kind of super strong metal with warning signs in 12 different languages. Most of them seem to say the same thing: danger. Are you absolutely certain about this, Miss? Asked Draw, the Emperor's advisor. He kept wringing his hands and glancing nervously at the door. We could arrange for you to observe from the safety of the monitoring room first. I didn't travel 3-star systems to watch through a window, Amy said, checking her medical bag one more time. Besides, children can sense when adults are afraid of them, it usually makes them act worse. General Corks laughed grimly. Lady, these aren't regular children. The last caretaker who went in there lasted 47 minutes. We found her hiding in a supply closet, muttering about fire demons. Amy looked at the general with raised eyebrows. 47 minutes, that's actually not too bad. The last family I worked with had twins who made 3 nannies quit on the same day. These twins can breathe plasma. Draw pointed out weakly. Well, that's new, Amy admitted, but kids are kids. No matter what species they are, they all want the same basic things. 2 aliens looked at each other like she just said something crazy. Maybe she had, but Amy had read everything the palace could tell her about the hatchlings during the trip here. Yes, they were genetically enhanced. Yes, they had incredible destructive abilities, but they were also babies who'd been separated from their father and handled by strangers who were all afraid of them. Open the door, she said. Drax's finger hovered over the control panel. The medical team is standing by. Security is ready to extract you at the first sign of trouble. If you need help, just shout. I'll be fine. The heavy door slid open with a hiss. Amy stepped inside and the door sealed shut behind her with a sound like a tomb closing. The nursery was enormous, with walls that looked like they'd been patched and repatched many times. Scorch marks covered every surface. In the far corner, 2 small shapes huddled in the shadows. They were about the size of large house cats with dark scales that seemed to absorb light. Their eyes glowed like tiny yellow stars in the dim room. For a moment nobody moved. Amy could hear her own heartbeat in the soft of air recycling systems. Then both hatchlings opened their mouths. The plasma streams came at her from 2 directions at once. Amy dove to the right, feeling the heat singe her hair as white-hot fire passed inches from her head. The wall where she'd been standing began to glow red. Okay, she said out loud, staying crouched behind an overturned table. That's definitely new. The hatchlings moved closer, their little claws clicking on the metal floor. One of them, slightly smaller than the other, made a sound like a tiny engine revving up. Amy recognized the warning sign just in time to roll away before another burst of plasma melted the table she'd been hiding behind. But as she watched them, something clicked in her mind. Their attacks weren't random. The bigger one always fired first, then the smaller one aimed. She would dodge too. They were working together, which meant they were thinking, planning. That was actually a very good sign for children their age. You 2 are pretty smart, she said, still dodging. But you're scared, aren't you? The smaller hatchling paused, tilting its head at the sound of her voice. Amy took the opportunity to study them more carefully. Despite their fearsome reputation, they looked like what they were, babies. Their scales were still soft, their movements unsteady. When the bigger one breathed fire, she noticed he stumbled backward from the force. It's okay, she said gently, staying low but not hiding anymore. I know you don't mean to hurt anyone. You're just scared and confused. The bigger hatchling charged at her, but something was wrong with his coordination. He tripped over his own feet and went sliding across the smooth floor, squeaking in surprise. Without thinking, Amy moved toward him. Easy there, big guy, she said, kneeling down. The little dragon scrambled away from her, but not before she saw something that made her heart ache. His Scales were singed around his mouth and chest he'd been burning himself with. His own fire. "Oh, sweetie," she whispered, "you hurt yourself, didn't you?" The smaller hatchling ran to his brother's side, making worried chirping noises. They pressed against each other, and Amy realized they were probably more scared than she was. She slowly reached into her medical bag and pulled out a small spray bottle filled with a mild antiseptic that worked on most species. "This will help with the burns," she said softly. "I promise it won't hurt." Both hatchlings tensed when she moved closer, but they didn't attack. Amy gently sprayed the medicine on the bigger one's burns. He flinched at first, then seemed surprised that it felt better instead of worse. "There you go," she said. "Much better, right?" For the first time since she'd entered the room, both hatchlings were calm. They looked at her with curious eyes instead of frightened ones. Amy sat down on the floor, making herself smaller and less threatening. "I bet nobody's told you to how special you are, have they? All they see is the fire and the power, but I can see you're both very smart and very brave." The smaller hatchling took a tentative step toward her. Amy held out her hand, palm up, the way she would with any nervous child. "My name is Amy," she said. "I'm here to take care of you. Would you like that?" Outside the nursery, General Corks was staring at the security monitors in disbelief. "She's just sitting there talking to them, and they're listening." Emperor Vax had arrived to watch the humans' inevitable failure, but instead he found himself leaning forward, fascinated. His children weren't attacking, they weren't destroying anything, they were sitting quietly listening to this strange, soft creature who had no claws, no armor, and no fear. "How long has she been in there?" he asked. Draw checked his timer. 3 minutes, Your Majesty. She just broke the record. Inside the nursery, Amy was having her first real conversation with the hatchlings. They couldn't talk yet, but they were surprisingly good at charades. The bigger one, whom she'd mentally named Spark, was trying to show her something by pointing at the wall with his tiny claw. "What is it, Spark? What are you trying to tell me?" Spark walked over to a section of the wall that looked newer than the rest, where the metal had been patched. He touched it gently, then looked back at her with what she could swear was embarrassment. "You accidentally melted this, didn't you?" she asked, and everyone got upset. Both hatchlings made sad little noises. "It's okay," Amy said firmly. "Accidents happen. You're still learning how to control your abilities. That's perfectly normal." The smaller one, whom she'd decided to call Flame, crawled closer and gently touched her hand with one small claw. His scales were warm but not burning hot. Amy smiled. "See, you can control it when you want to. You just need someone to help you practice." On the security monitors, Emperor Vax watched his children interact peacefully with another being for the first time in their lives. Something tight in his chest began to loosen. "General," he said quietly, "cancel the backup plans. I think we may have found our solution." 2 weeks later, the palace was a completely different place. Instead of constant alarms and emergency calls, there was something that hadn't been heard in the royal halls for months: the sound of laughter. Amy walked down the corridor carrying a bucket of ice cubes and what looked like art supplies. Behind her, 2 small dragons followed like devoted puppies. Spark and Flame had grown noticeably in the past 2 weeks, now about the size of medium dogs, but their behavior had changed even more dramatically than their size. "Good morning, Nurse Amy," called one of the palace guards as she passed. He actually smiled at the hatchlings instead of reaching for his weapon. "What's on today's schedule?" "Ice sculpture target practice," Amy replied cheerfully. "These two have been working on their aim." The guard's eyes widened slightly. Target practice with plasma breath still sounded dangerous to most of the staff, but they'd all seen the results of Amy's methods. The random destruction had stopped completely. The hatchlings were learning to use their abilities on purpose instead of by accident. In the nursery, Amy set up her daily ice sculptures on a specially designed metal table. She'd learned that the hatchlings needed to use their fire breath regularly. Trying to suppress it just made them anxious and more likely to have accidents later, so instead of stopping them from breathing fire, she gave them specific things to burn. "Okay, boys," she said, stepping back from the table. "Remember what we practiced: deep breath, focus on your target, and gentle flames. We want to melt them slowly, not explode them all over the room." Spark went first. He'd been working hard on controlling the temperature of his fire instead of the white-hot plasma that had terrorized previous caretakers. He breathed out a steady orange flame that slowly melted his ice sculpture into interesting shapes. "Perfect," Amy praised. "Much better control than yesterday." "Flame, your turn." Flame had different approach. His fire tended to be hotter but in shorter bursts. He could carve precise patterns in ice with quick focused breaths. Today he was trying to write his name in ice by melting away the parts he didn't want. As the hatchlings practiced, Amy made notes in a journal she'd been keeping. Every day she recorded their progress, their moods, and any new abilities they developed. The palace scientists had been fascinated by her observations. Amy called a familiar voice from the nursery entrance. She turned to see Draw peering in nervously. He still wasn't completely comfortable around the hatchlings, but he no longer ran away when he saw them. "Yes, Draw, His Majesty requests your presence in the throne room if it's convenient." Amy looked at Spark and Flame, who were still focused on their ice sculptures. "Can you two keep practicing while I'm gone? Remember, aim carefully and no accidents." Both hatchlings chirped agreement. Amy had discovered they understood much more than anyone had realized. Their intelligence was advancing rapidly, probably aided by the genetic enhancements. The throne room felt different now, too. Emperor Vax no longer looked like a ruler barely holding on to control. He stood confidently, but there was something softer in his expression when he looked at Amy. "Nurse Amy," he said formally, "I wanted to discuss your progress with my children. They're doing wonderfully, Your Majesty. Their emotional control has improved dramatically, and they're starting to show real precision with their abilities." "Yes, I've seen the reports, but I have questions about your methods. They seem unusual." Amy nodded. She'd been expecting this conversation. "Different from traditional Draw Murray child rearing, you mean?" "Different from any child rearing I've ever heard of," Vax admitted. "You don't try to dominate them or make them submit. You don't punish them for their mistakes, yet they obey you better than they've ever obeyed anyone. They don't obey me, Your Majesty. They trust me." The Emperor frowned. "Explain the difference." Amy thought for a moment. "When someone obeys out of fear, they're always looking for a chance to rebel or escape. When someone trusts you, they want to make you proud. Spark and Flame aren't trying to please me because they're afraid of what will happen if they don't. They're trying to please me because they know I care about them, and you do care about them. Of course I do. They're wonderful children. A little more destructive than most, but all children have their challenges. General Corks, who had been listening quietly from the side of the room, stepped forward. But they're being trained as war dragons, not pets. They need to be fierce, independent, able to fight without hesitation. Amy looked at him with genuine confusion. What makes you think trust and affection make someone weak in battle? In my experience, people fight hardest for the things they love. Before anyone could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the palace. Red lights flashed and automated voices announced, "Security breach in Sector 7. All units respond immediately." Emperor Vax's expression hardened instantly. "What's happening?" A communications officer burst into the throne room. "Your Majesty, we have intruders. 3 ships. Unknown configuration. They've breached the outer defenses and are heading for the palace. Defensive positions." Vax ordered, "Deploy the guard units to protect the nursery." Amy interrupted, sudden fear flooding her voice. Spark and Flame are alone in there. She was already running before anyone could stop her. Behind her she heard the Emperor shouting orders and heavy footsteps following, but all she could think about was getting back to the hatchlings. The corridor leading to the nursery tower was chaos. Palace guards were running in every direction. Emergency lights were flashing, and through the windows Amy could see strange ships hovering outside. But worse than any of that was the sound coming from the nursery. Angry dragon roars, but not the frightened, uncontrolled roars she'd heard when she first arrived. These sounded focused, purposeful. Amy burst through the nursery door and stopped short. Spark and Flame were pressed against the far wall, their scales bright with anger and fear. But they weren't alone. 3 figures in dark armor were advancing on them, carrying what looked like capture nets and stun weapons. "There they are," one of the intruders said in a language Amy's translator picked up. "The enhanced hatchlings. The buyer will pay double if we bring them back alive." "Stay back," Amy shouted, stepping between the intruders and the hatchlings. "Don't you dare touch them." The lead intruder laughed. "Human female, move aside. We're here for the dragons, not you. Over my dead body if you insist." The intruder raised his weapon, but before he could fire, something amazing happened. Spark and Flame moved together with perfect coordination, like they'd been planning this their whole lives. Flame breathed a precise stream of fire that melted the weapon in the intruder's hands without burning the intruder himself. At the same time, Spark used his sonic roar, not the random screaming Amy had heard about, but a focused sound wave that knocked all 3 intruders off their feet. But they weren't done. As the intruders tried to get up, both hatchlings positioned themselves protectively in front of Amy. Their fire breath came in controlled bursts, creating a barrier of heat that forced the intruders back toward the door. Emperor Vax arrived just in time to see his children working together with military precision to defend their nursery and their caretaker. Palace guards quickly captured the stunned intruders, but Vax barely noticed. He was staring at Spark and Flame, who were now gently nuzzling against Amy to make sure she was unharmed. How he whispered. Amy knelt down to comfort the hatchlings, checking them for injuries, even though they'd clearly won the fight. I told you, she said softly. People fight hardest for the things they love, and these two loved their home. Now they were protecting it. General Quarks was examining the melted remains of the intruder's weapon. This level of precision, this coordination. Our adult war dragons aren't this good because your adult dragons were trained through fear and dominance, Amy said, still holding Spark and Flame. These two were raised with trust and affection. They're not just following orders. They're thinking, adapting, making their own decisions about how to protect what matters to them. Emperor Vax looked at his children, who had just demonstrated abilities beyond anything his military had thought possible, and realized that the small human kneeling on his nursery floor had accomplished something unprecedented. She hadn't just tamed the untamable hatchlings, she had turned them into something better than weapons. She had helped them become heroes. 3 months after the failed kidnapping attempt, news of the Emperor's remarkable baby dragons had spread across the galaxy. What nobody expected was that Emperor Vax himself would be found crawling around on the nursery floor, pretending to be a maintenance worker so he could observe Amy's methods without interfering. The disguise wasn't very convincing. Few maintenance workers wore cloaks made of royal silk or had bodyguards stationed outside the door. But Amy pretended not to notice as the Emperor watched her morning routine with Spark and Flame, who were now the size of large ponies and developing distinct personalities. All right, boys, Amy said, setting up their breakfast. Remember what we practiced about table manners, Flame. That means no melting your food bowl just because you're excited. Flame, who had always been the more impulsive of the twins, made what sounded like a dragon giggle and carefully breathed cool air on his food instead of hot air. It was a trick Amy had taught him after realizing that dragons could control the temperature of their breath just like humans could whistle different notes. Emperor Vax watched in fascination as his children ate politely, taking turns and even sharing their favorite pieces with each other. When he had been their age, meal times were competitive battles where the strongest ate first and most. But Spark and Flame seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. Your Majesty, Amy said without looking up from preparing their vitamins, you can drop the maintenance worker disguise. Spark figured out who you were on the first day. Vax straightened up, his cover blown. How did you know? You smell like the expensive soap they use in the royal quarters. Also, real maintenance workers don't flinch every time the babies breathe fire. Spark padded over to his father and made a happy rumbling sound. In the past few months he'd grown more confident and outgoing. He gently butted his head against Vax's leg in the dragon equivalent of a hug. For a moment, the Emperor of 12 star systems didn't know what to do. Physical affection wasn't common in Drakmary culture, especially not between fathers and sons, but something about the trusting way Spark looked up at him made his decision easy. He knelt down and awkwardly patted the young dragon's head. He's grown so much, Vax said quietly, in more ways than just size. Amy agreed. Both of them have their developing empathy, problem-solving skills, and emotional intelligence way ahead of schedule. The genetic enhancements didn't just make them physically stronger, they made them mentally more capable too. Flame joined. His brother and father, and soon both. Hatchlings were competing for attention. Vax found himself laughing as they play fought around his feet, their movements perfectly controlled so they wouldn't accidentally hurt him. I came here to understand what you were doing differently, he admitted. My advisors keep asking how you achieved results that our best dragon trainers couldn't manage. Amy sat down on the floor with them, which was apparently the signal for both dragons to curl up next to her. Like giant scaly cats, I didn't do anything special, I just treated them like the intelligent children they are, instead of like weapons in training. But they are weapons or they will be. The genetic modifications were designed to create the perfect war dragons, maybe, Amy said thoughtfully, but perfect for what kind of war? Before Vax could ask what she meant, an urgent chiming sound came from his communication device. He activated it and General Quarks's face appeared in the holographic display. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Nixari fleet has been spotted near our outer planet, intelligence suggests. They're planning to test our defenses. Vax stood up immediately. The Nixari were old enemies, a warlike species that had been probing the Empire's borders for years. How many ships? 12 battle cruisers and support vessels. They're demanding tribute payments or they'll attack the mining colonies. Amy watched the Emperor's expression grow cold and dangerous. This was the side of him that had conquered star systems and built an empire through strength and fear. Prepare the fleet, Vax ordered. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Actually, sir, there's something else. The Nexari commander specifically mentioned the enhanced hatchlings in his demands. Word has gotten out about their abilities. He wants them as part of the tribute. Spark and Flame both made angry, hissing sounds, even at their young age. They understood enough to know someone was threatening their family. Never, V said flatly and cut the communication. Amy was studying both hatchlings carefully. They want to help, she said. What? Look at them. They know there's danger and they want to protect their home. Just like during the kidnapping attempt. Indeed, both dragons were alert and focused, their scales starting to glow. With suppressed energy, they weren't afraid, they were ready to fight. Absolutely not, Vax said firmly. They're still children, I won't risk them in battle. What if they didn't have to be in the battle directly? Amy asked thoughtfully. What if they could help from here? An hour later, the strangest military briefing in galactic history was taking place in the palace nursery. Admiral Rex, General Quarks, and the Empire's top strategic commanders were all sitting on the floor while Amy explained her idea. The Nexari expect traditional battle tactics, she said, using blocks and toys to demonstrate. They know how our adult war dragons fight. Direct assault, overwhelming force, individual combat, but Spark and Flame fight differently. She moved the toys around to show coordination and strategy. They work together, they think ahead, and they can adapt their abilities in real time. Plus they have something our adult dragons don't have. Which is? Asked Admiral Rex skeptically. They understand the value of precision over power. Watch this. Amy turned to the hatchlings. Boys, show them the communication technique we've been working on. Both dragons took deep breaths and released carefully modulated sonic roars, but instead of the random noise everyone expected, the sounds were clearly patterned, rhythmic pulses that carried across the entire palace. They can coordinate other dragons from a distance, Amy explained. Not through fear or dominance, but through actual communication. They could direct your entire dragon fleet like conductors leading an orchestra. General Corks was staring. That's not possible. Adult war dragons are too independent, too aggressive to follow complex commands in battle. Adult dragons who were raised the old way. Yes, Amy agreed, but what if you had pilots who could communicate with them the way Spark and Flame do? What if your fleet could work together instead of just attacking in the same general direction? Military commanders looked at each other. The idea was revolutionary and completely against everything they'd been taught about dragon warfare. Emperor Vax was quiet for a long moment, watching his children demonstrate their abilities. Finally he spoke. The Nexari will expect us to meet them with brute force. They've studied our tactics for years. He looked at Amy, but they've never seen anything like this, have they? Amy smiled. No, Your Majesty, they haven't. The next day, when the Nexari fleet arrived expecting an easy conquest, they found something completely unexpected. Instead of the chaotic individual attacks they'd prepared for, they faced a coordinated dragon fleet that moved like a single organism. From the palace, Spark and Flame directed the battle through complex sonic signals that somehow reached across the vast distance of space. Adult dragons, instead of fighting each other for dominance, worked together in perfect harmony. The battle was over in less than an hour. The Nexari, facing tactics they couldn't understand or counter, retreated in confusion and defeat. Emperor Vax found Amy in the nursery afterward, where both hatchlings were napping peacefully after their first military victory. They saved the Empire today, he said quietly. They saved their family, Amy corrected. That's what children do when they're raised with love instead of fear. They protect the people who matter to them. Vax looked at his sleeping children and realized that Amy hadn't just solved his child care problem. She had revolutionized everything he thought he knew about strength, power, and leadership. The galaxy was about to learn that the most dangerous weapon wasn't the one that destroyed everything in its path. It was the one that brought out the best in everyone around it. 1 year after Amy Collins first walked into the palace nursery, she stood in the same room watching a scene that would have been impossible to imagine back then. Spark and Flame, now the size of adult horses but still growing, were carefully helping 3 much smaller dragon hatchlings learn to control their fire breath. The smaller dragons belonged to allied noble families who had begged Emperor Vax to let Amy train their children too. Word of the miraculous transformation had spread throughout the Empire, and every noble house wanted their future war dragons raised the human way. Gentle flames, little ones, Amy coached as the babies practice melted small ice cubes. Remember, you control the fire, not the other way around. One of the baby dragons, a nervous little female named Pip, accidentally breathed too hard and melted not just her ice cube but part of the metal table underneath. She immediately curled up in shame, expecting punishment. But Spark was there in an instant, nuzzling the frightened hatchling and making soft, encouraging sounds. He demonstrated the proper breathing technique, showing Pip exactly how to control the intensity of her flames. Amy smiled as she watched Spark and Flame had become natural teachers, patient and encouraging with the younger dragons, ways that amazed everyone who saw it. Nurse Amy called a familiar voice. She turned to see Emperor Vax entering the nursery, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a delegation of beings she'd never seen before. Tall, graceful aliens, with silver skin and large, intelligent eyes. Your Majesty, Amy said, noting the formal tone in his voice. Are we having visitors today? Amy, I'd like you to meet Ambassador Lyra and her delegation from the Celestial Federation. They've come a very long way to meet you. Ambassador Lyra stepped forward with fluid grace. Nurse Collins, your reputation has spread far beyond this empire. We've come to make a proposal that could change the course of galactic relations. Amy looked confused. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm just a pediatric nurse. You are the human who accomplished what every military strategist in the EU galaxy said was impossible. Lyra replied. You turned the most feared emperor's children from weapons of destruction into instruments of peace and cooperation. The battle with the Nexari was studied by every military academy in known space. That was really more spark and flames doing than mine, Amy said modestly, as if hearing their names. Both dragons looked up from helping the smaller ones and padded over to Amy. They were magnificent now, their scales gleaming with health and their movements showing the perfect control they developed, but they still acted like the babies who had been so frightened and alone when she'd first met them. Ambassador Lyra watched in fascination as the two powerful dragons gently competed for Amy's attention, each trying to show off their latest accomplishments. Remarkable, she breathed. In our culture, we have legends of beings who could speak to the hearts of the fiercest creatures. We thought they were just stories. Emperor Vax gestured for everyone to sit down, which in this nursery meant finding places on the soft floor mats Amy had installed. The Federation has a proposal, Amy. They want to establish a formal cultural exchange program. What kind of program? Amy asked, settling down with Spark's massive head in her lap. Lyra pulled out a complex holographic document. Earth would share its childering expertise with interested species across the galaxy. In return, participating worlds would provide advanced technology, medical knowledge, and mutual defense agreements. Amy blinked. You want to trade babysitting techniques for starships? We want to trade the secret of creating loyalty through love instead of fear. Lyra corrected. Do you have any idea how many species struggle with raising their young? How many civilizations are torn apart by children who grow up angry and resentful? She activated the hologram, showing images of various alien species and their young. The crystalline consortium has been dealing with a generation of children who shatter at the slightest emotional stress. The void walkers, teenagers, keep running away to join pirate fleets. The metal singers, youth refuse to learn their traditional crafts and are forgetting their culture entirely. Amy studied the images, her nurse's instincts automatically analyzing the problems. They're all showing signs of emotional neglect or authoritarian upbringing. These kids aren't bad, they're just crying out for attention and understanding. Exactly, Emperor Vax said, and after seeing what you accomplished here, the Federation believes humans might have solutions. But I'm just one person, Amy protested. And every species is different. What works for dragons might not work for crystalline beings or metal singers. Flame, who had been listening quietly, made a series of complex sounds, not quite words but close to it. Amy had been working with both dragons on developing speech, and they were much further along than anyone expected. "What did he say?" Lyra asked, amazed. Amy smiled. "He said that love is the same in every language, and he's right. The basic needs, safety, affection, understanding, guidance, those are universal." Over the next several hours, they worked out the details. Amy would become the first human ambassador for child development, working with a team of human pediatric specialists to establish training programs across the galaxy. Earth would gain access to advanced medical technology that could eliminate most childhood diseases, along with defensive alliances that would protect humanity's growing presence in galactic society. But the most important part of the agreement was something nobody had expected. Spark and Flame would serve as demonstration models, traveling to other worlds to show what was possible when children were raised with patience and love instead of fear and force. "Are you sure they're ready for that responsibility?" Amy asked, looking at her two charges, who were now playing a complex strategy game with the younger dragons. Amy, Emperor Vax said quietly, "Look at them, really look at them." She did. Spark was patiently explaining the game rules to a confused hatchling, demonstrating each move slowly until the little one understood. Flame was sharing his favorite treats with a dragon who had been too shy to ask for them. Both of them moved with confidence and grace, but also with genuine kindness toward everyone around them. "They're not just war dragons anymore, are they?" she realized. "They never were just war dragons," Vex replied. "They were always meant to be leaders. You just helped them become the right kind of leaders." 6 months later, Amy stood on the observation deck of the Galactic Federation's flagship, watching through the viewports as they approached another world. This was their 15th planet in the cultural exchange program, and the results had been extraordinary. Behind her, Spark and Flame were having an animated conversation with a group of young aliens from their previous stop. The dragons had learned to speak several galactic languages and had become celebrities in their own right, not for their power but for their wisdom and kindness. "Nervous about the new assignment?" asked Dr. Lisa from the Earth delegation. She was one of 5 human specialists who had joined the program. "A little," Amy admitted. "The thermal worms are supposed to be very different from anything we've worked with before." "Different how?" Amy checked her notes. "They reproduce by butting. They live in lava flows, and their children are born knowing everything their parents knew. Apparently that's causing problems because the young ones are rebelling against having predetermined lives." Dr. Lisa whistled low. "That is different. How do you show independence to kids who are born with their parents' memories?" "I'm not sure yet," Amy said, "but I have a feeling Spark and Flame will figure it out. They always do." As if summoned by her words, both dragons appeared at her sides. They were fully grown now, magnificent creatures who could have conquered worlds if they wanted to. Instead, they spent their time helping scared children learn to believe in themselves, ready for another adventure. Amy asked them. Spark rumbled happily and nuzzled her shoulder. Flame made a sound that clearly meant always. In the dragon language they developed together through the viewport. Amy could see the volcanic world growing, larger as they approached. Somewhere down there were children who needed help, families torn apart by misunderstanding and problems that seemed impossible to solve. But Amy had learned something important over the past year and a half. There was no such thing as an impossible child, only children who hadn't found the right adult to understand them yet, and she had the best helpers in the galaxy. As their ship entered the planet's atmosphere, beginning another chapter, the growing alliance between species, Amy Collins smiled and got ready to prove once again that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't a weapon or a technology. Sometimes it was just someone who cared enough to listen. The galaxy was learning one child at a time.